I want to see. Hi, Kay. Jackie. Hi, everybody. Okay, great. Thanks for joining online. Okay, hello to all of you. Thanks for coming in person. It's so good to see you. I continue to be a mask wearer because of my 80-year-old mother and my small children. So, but it's not a mandatory thing. Just want to make sure that everybody knows. I don't have anything weird, so I'm not. I mean, that's debatable, I guess, right, Jonathan?
Sort of.
Yeah, not mask wearer.
So thanks for coming. It's great to see you. This is a really, it is really great to start off Europe Week 2022 for the first time back in person, or hybrid, I should say, and having a EURO-TAM alumni event because there's nothing better than Euro and TAM. And to have this kind of reunion, to have you all here, to have you, here to talk and be either in or interested in TAM or Euro and being a part of our community. And it's something that Sarah and I really value the most in our work, is working with all of you students, incoming, current, and grads is just the best, the whole lifespan of being a part of our programs. So we're so excited. And tonight, not only do we love TAM, but the European Union also loves Euro and TAM, and they're funding tonight, funded your travel. So thanks to the European Union, they recognize why our programs are so important. And, it's not just about working on Europe for the rest of your lives, which all three of you will show us or tell us tonight and have shown, but it's also about understanding how Europe works, how the transatlantic relationship works. And I think it would be great if you guys could talk a little bit about, but of course Sarah has her moderator questions, but why is it important to study Europe? Why does that matter? And how it's not, looking at Europe within a set amount of borders and then that pigeonholes you for the rest of your life, but understanding what's happening there and how that plays a role, what's happening for the rest of the world, especially right now. We can all come together, of course, and recognize what's happening in Ukraine and the atrocities there. So it is all the more imperative to talk about the transatlantic relationship and how we need to come together and somehow solve that problem immediately. So Europe Week, here we are. I wanted to remind you that Brett Harris, our fabulous person here in the first row, has set up Wordle, Wordle spelled with W-E-U-R-D-L-E. Go on Instagram, do Wordle, play Wordle. You can also play, I forgot the bingo. I'll get the bingo pages. You can play bingo this week, win a prize. You can design a t-shirt for Euro-TAM or the Center for European Studies. Design a t-shirt, win a prize, win the t-shirt that you've then designed, right? And, Eurovision Song Contest brackets, Brett has created so that you can meet all your friends and decide who's going to be the Eurovision contest winner. So much fun to be had. And if you want to design a t-shirt, you send the design to Brett Harris, which is brett.harris@unc.edu. There he is, in the front row. Okay, so I'm going to start with Jonathan, right here, Jonathan Buechner, who I've known a while, yes. And when we met, we realized that we both went to the same high school, just a few years apart. And we connected right away. You became a Euro major relatively early in your UNC career. You were a work study student with us the whole time. Your claim to fame, clearly, is that you are on the front page of the Europe.unc website since you were a student with us. Still there, that picture. It's so great. And you were the first Euro-TAM 3+2 student. You were the first one to do it in 3 years, and then do TAM in 2. You studied abroad your last semester of undergrad in Lyon, which is a story I tell everyone to not do that because it was really difficult to graduate and get the credits transferred back. But you graduated in 2017 and then finished TAM in 2019 after completing a year here and a year in Barcelona and getting the double degree. Also, landmark, this is all firsts here. And you still haven't gotten your diploma, but it's going to be, when you get it, it will be signed by the king.
So they say.
Yes. So clearly, another reason to do TAM. double degree gets, your degree gets signed by, okay, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Okay, and currently, we miss you every day still, because you were very much a part of the center, and you'll see how all three of them were. You are currently working as the development coordinator for Metro at the Brookings Institution in DC, and you focus on managing all development operations. Excellent. And you were the Philanthropy Manager at Arts Plus in Charlotte before, where you worked on grant writing and reporting, things that you learned intimately here at the center. And you are living your best life in DC, and you love coming back down to see us.
Yes, all that is true.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, next, Amber Cassidy in alphabetical order. We love you all the same. Graduated from UNC as the Euro major in 2016 and graduated from TAM 2 years later. Also went to UPF in Barcelona. Amber had a FLAS for Portuguese, both for the academic year and for the summer, and you studied in Lisbon over that summer between. Did you also have another job in that summer between?
Yeah, I was at the embassy in
That's what I
the
thought. Yes.
political section.
Yes. Also an excellent thing to ask about. And Amber also worked at the center while she was an undergraduate here. And Amber created the original Teaching the EU toolkits with her roommate, who was at the School of Education at the time. So we had a pedagogy expert and an EU expert together.
I hope they've been improved since.
They have been updated because, Brexit and a few other things have happened. But still, you created the original Teaching the EU toolkits. So that's really fantastic. And Amber went to Brussels with us. Went back when we were able to take students to Brussels on our summer trip, and that was really fantastic. Yes, that was right after I started in the job.
That was an awesome trip.
It was. And you asked really good questions. You asked really good questions all week, but you asked really good questions of the U.S. mission on Friday afternoon after a whole week. And this is another, you rallied and asked, what is it like to be a diplomat? And the person actually answered honestly. It was really great. So thank you for that. Amber is currently a national security policy expert. Okay, so this is where it gets really jargony. She told
you don't have to do all the.
I'm not going to read the end, but you leverage broad federal agency expertise spanning the Department of Defense and the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, so DoD to NIST, to develop and execute federal advocacy strategies. So you're a lobbyist.
Yes, lots of buzzwords.
Right,
lobbyist
for
and consultant.
Right, yes. Great, so please ask a lot of questions. So thank you, Amber, for being here. And last but not least, Erin Kreider in the middle, graduated with a degree in European Studies and Political Science, 2017. She then took a year off, worked for us, and was critical in us getting further 4 years of funding from the Department of Education. Huge. So her imprint is all over our current Title VI award. Wow, you really did a lot for us that year. Thank you again.
Happy to help.
And you also had a FLAS for Turkish and also a summer class for German before that. You studied abroad in Berlin as an undergrad. You went to Bremen with TAM and also got the double degree. You had a State Department internship in the summer between TAM years. You worked at Carolina Performing Arts. I did a lot during your undergraduate career, which meant I hardly ever saw you. But when I did see you, we always had long and excellent conversations because we're still friends. And currently, you're working for the Department of Defense for DoD in Colorado, enjoying the many amazing trails with her husband and dog.
Yep.
Does that sum it up?
Yeah, I work at US Space Com in Colorado.
Great. Okay, so I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you for letting me take so much time to introduce these wonderful people. Thanks, everyone. And Sarah.
Yeah, sure. I would love to just, Katie, you did such a great job introducing everyone. I'd love to give you a few minutes to let me get the ready position. To just talk a little bit about yourselves, maybe 5 minutes or 3 or 2 or whatever you feel comfortable. Telling us a little bit about yourselves, and then I have a few questions. Maybe you have questions for each other. Maybe you have questions for the audience members. But let me also thank you so much for making time to come here, have lunch with us today, be part of this event, and it's especially wonderful for me because I remember back in the day when we created the Euro major and then when we fused TAM with the Euro major to make this combined program, and all along we were just like, never gonna work, no one's gonna want to do it. And look at you now. I mean, wow, like living and breathing. So whether you do the Euro undergrad and then TAM, or as we have some examples among you, or whether you come in TAM from other places, it's just really exciting work. And as Katie said, that's the most fun part of our job, to work with all students and then see where it goes. So thank you. So yeah, we'd love to hear. Johnson, why don't you start?
Sure. So after that wonderful introduction by Katie, I guess I can just touch on a little more of my path from a Euro major to where I am now. The Euro major, I think, was a really interesting way to kind of just get a wide variety of classes. So history classes, French classes, political science classes. It was kind of just like whatever you're interested in, you can take it. And if there's something that's like not on the list, you could be flexible and like try and see how that fit into the curriculum. And so I really appreciated that. Obviously, a big part for me, which I think still resonates probably with a lot of people here, is just the wonderful sense of community and individual attention, which was something that I really was looking for in a place as big as UNC. Just because coming to UNC from a smaller school, it was a little bit intimidating to think about how I would kind of make my way and just like find out what I was interested in. And so having a kind of smaller place in one of the nicest buildings on campus was a really great way to kind of meet other people and just find a nice community inside the larger UNC community. The EURO-TAM program, I think, was really cool. Obviously, it was not that fun having to do kind of condensed coursework. And as Katie mentioned, studying abroad, that last semester was not really the best idea. But since I've been a guinea pig for a lot of things, we made it work in the end. But that was a really wonderful experience. Obviously, it saved a year of school for me. And so while all my friends were seniors, I got to say that I was in grad school, which was a nice flex as well. But aside from that, it was a really cool experience since the classes that I was taking as an undergrad were filled with TAM students. Most of the time, so that's how I heard about the program. And they seemed to be really interested and really engaged in what they were studying. And I thought that was a really good, kind of the best way to kind of sell the program. And then obviously the year in Barcelona, as you can imagine, was very difficult to live in Barcelona and study. But it was a really great experience, especially doing the double degree, because we kind of got to start with another cohort of students who were doing the one-year masters there. So it was really a nice way to make friends. And also we got to see everyone's research projects from the very beginning, because they were very methodical and like, what is a research question? How do you do this? And like every step of the process, we kind of saw how everyone's projects evolved from being one thing to being something completely different, or people who like stuck with the same theme or tweaked it a little bit. And so that was also just kind of like a nice cohort experience to have. And I also branched out a little bit at UPF and took a Catalan class, which they offered for basically free, because they would love to get as many people to learn Catalan as possible. So that was just another smaller way that I was able to kind of just like make more of my experience there by just kind of understanding how it was a really interesting mix actually between Spanish and French, which I already knew. And so it was really cool to see how that language played out, since it was everywhere at that time. And then after TAM, I ended up in Charlotte. And after about like a month or two of job searching, I just took the first thing that came along, because I was tired of looking for things and applying for things every day. And I ended up at a small arts education nonprofit called Arts Plus. There were about 12 full-time staff. So kind of similar to the center, where I was very used to working in a really small environment, which also meant that you have to wear many hats and you're not just one certain thing, or if you have one certain function, you have multiple. So that was a really great experience. And so because of that, and because of some like staff changes during COVID, I got to take on a lot more, from just like helping to write grants to like actually helping to manage the entire process. And then at the end, before I left, like actually getting to have conversations with funders, which was really interesting. And so that led me to Brookings, where I did an events internship in 2018. So that was my first introduction. And I was in the central communications office, so that was interesting because Brookings is made up of 5 main research programs, and so I got to see all the different events and kind of the style of each of the research programs. And that led me to where I am now. And the Metro program focuses a lot on research in cities and urban areas, but also on really like timely topics such as climate change, student loan debt, housing, all these sorts of kind of big like infrastructure as well. So it's really interesting to just be surrounded by people who are thinking about these issues, and then also making like real-time policy impact and like their research being cited in new bills and stuff, which is really cool. And so most of what I do is focus on just helping to make sure our grants process moves along, making sure that renewals are getting started on time, that people are having conversations with the appropriate folks, updating contact lists, and then also just getting to do a lot of other random stuff, since they just launched a 25th anniversary campaign, so that's been interesting to kind of help put together materials for that as well. So that's pretty good.
Thank you. All right, Erin, let's go to you.
Okay. So listening to Jonathan, there are a couple things that really resonated with me as well about TAM and about Euro. And I think that community and flexibility are really important keywords there. My entire process through TAM has been, and through Euro, has been full of really helpful alumni who were able to reach back, and Katie and Sarah, who are always available to make a big campus feel small. I remember when I first wanted to do the Euro major, my UNC advisor didn't know what the major was. And I had to come back and talk to Katie to get it all sorted out. And that community, gave me the opportunity to work here at the center for a year, to be able to learn grants. And then that was super helpful when I was at the Department of State, working in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. And it all sort of flowed in a way that I never could have planned myself, but that the opportunities and the people who want to support you and to provide you with opportunities and guide you through the opportunities that you have are there. And that has been incredibly valuable for me. And flexibility, I never thought I would work in space. I avoided math classes for a reason. But here I am. And so it's a blessing and a curse. These majors lend themselves to a lot of different things. And I think you can see that in all the alumni that come through here. You can kind of do whatever you want to do. And you might find yourself doing something you never expected to do. And so out in Colorado working on space, it's really cool. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without the sort of stepping stones that Euro and TAM provided me, being able to learn how to do grants, being able to get a Department of State internship, being able to go to Bremen and do an internship there, which for me at least, Bremen, the real beauty of Northern Germany is not the weather, but the requirement for you to do an internship to graduate. And so what I've learned from my time here is that flexibility is important, because sometimes the coolest opportunities are the ones you never thought you would get, or the ones you didn't even know existed. And then community, because there are people here who want to give you the opportunities that you don't know exist and set you up for your next one. If you like the rain, the University of Bremen is fantastic. You do have to mail them an electronic copy of your thesis on a thumb drive. as an indication for German bureaucracy. But I wouldn't be where I am without the ability to take advantage of the opportunities here and the people who are willing to give them. So regardless of whether you do Euro or TAM, I would definitely recommend take advantage of the people that are around you, take advantage of the alumni network, because they're fantastic, and be flexible because you can work in some really cool places that you would never expect, and you don't necessarily have to take physics classes to get there.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, I think the common theme here is that the Euro major and or TAM, they afford you so many opportunities that you don't even see on the horizon until you're talking to Sarah, Katie, and you're like, this is real, I can do this, I can find a way to get funded, or you have this network and there's someone I can talk to that has a shared interest. And so my life wouldn't be the same, of course, without doing both the Euro major and TAM. I kind of fell into it by accident. I think in my freshman or sophomore year, Sarah did a round to a lot of the intro to European politics classes and those types of classes. And Sarah came in and kind of did a pitch like, we care about you and want you to care about Europe. So come to the office anytime. And that was the first time at UNC, great school, but that someone in a kind of an advisor role was like, we really want to walk you through this. It's not just check a box, you'll graduate. It was really like, we're here and we're here to talk to you. And so getting to know the center, the people there, going through that and learning more about TAM, applying for scholarship opportunities like FLAS, having the heads up that, hey, FLAS for all these languages, maybe you want to study Portuguese and that could make you more competitive. That really helped propel my career, got me into that internship at the U.S. Embassy in Lisbon, where, I didn't realize how much I needed Portuguese until my whole job there every day was to read the news. And Google Translate does not do you right. No matter like how you're like trying to read it. And I'm like, okay, I really am glad I took the language classes, was able to take more language classes in Portugal. And then similar to Jonathan, I studied in Barcelona, which very difficult place to have to hang out for a few months. The beach is really tough. The drinks and food also very difficult. So if you really want to take it on, you can. But I was actually there when Barcelona tried to secede from Spain. So it was a really unique experience on top of normal classes. I was there during just a major political upheaval. Actually, my courses were delayed by at least a month. And we just got to hang out in Barcelona. We get emails from our professors like, sorry, I'm on the ground doing this protest. We'll postpone class until next week. And so while I was there to learn, I was afforded this opportunity where I just got to see a political revolution in action. And I think most of us know how that has turned out so far, but it was still really cool to see. And I think I skipped, I think, Katie, you might have mentioned when I went to Brussels. I had never had that type of European experience before. I studied abroad in college, but it was very much UNC and Sevilla. I was in my classes, we were speaking English. And then when I went on this fully funded tour to Brussels and between undergrad and graduate school, they just took us around Brussels and kind of showed us all the different threads you could experience. So the mission to the EU, we went to see, I think, like a center for education. And so that was really eye-opening to me, and I think helped kind of prepare me for what I would later pursue in DC. And I'll try to speed this up because I think I'm going on too long. But the alumni network is actually another reason I am where I am today. So when I was in Barcelona, I had kept in touch with a few people I met during our TAM DC event in the fall. And so you get to go to DC network, TAM alumni host you. It's really fun. And so I met a few, and one of them I just stayed in contact with. And while I was writing my thesis in Barcelona, he emailed me and said, hey, I'm looking for a spring intern at the Bertelsmann Foundation, which is a German kind of a transatlantic think tank. He's like, do you know anyone that would be interested? It's a part-time paid internship. And I was like, me, I'll be interested. I'm not going to forward this email to anyone. And so I was able to come to DC, write my thesis, get some other part-time jobs, of course, but work at the think tank and learn about manufacturing and science and technology policy specific to the transatlantic relationship. And that was really cool and very impressive to the lobbying firm that I work at now. And now my portfolio has expanded to national security, including manufacturing, science and technology in general, but also standards. And so kind of making that jump from Euro to TAM, then to having that alumni network that allowed me to have kind of my first job / internship in DC. And now I'm in a job I've been in for 4 years and absolutely love. I don't think it would all be possible without Katie and Sarah and the whole center and TAM. So I'll stop there.
Well, it's really exciting to hear you talk about the way you've gone out and pursued these opportunities. I mean, it makes me so proud. And I know also, I mean, obviously by being here, you're giving back, but I know also, you know, you've helped Andrew come into your firm. Jonathan, I know you've been helping field some inquiries about Brookings internships, and Aaron, I know you're always ready to talk about women and other things. So thank you for also bringing that full circle and continuing what, you know, is the base there to move forward. It's great to hear about. One question I have for you is today where we are, and Katie alluded to this, why do you think it's important for people to study the transatlantic relationship and pursue something like the Euro major undergrad and TAM? Maybe from your specific vantage points in DC and Colorado, from your professional point of view and personal. You want to start, Jonathan?
Sure. I can start with the fact that it's obviously timely and relevant, and I think will always be, depending on whatever new event or political situation is happening. I think that that's something that is always going to be important. And something that I really was interested in during my time was kind of the comparative aspect of it. So comparing it to the US, but also like comparing European countries against each other. That for me was kind of like the lens, I guess, that I took in studying it. I will say in terms of the way that like Euro and TAM also looks in your resume is a really interesting conversation starter for people in interviews. And so that's something that I found to be really helpful to kind of like, people are always like, oh, I'm interested about like the dates here and like why you studied at this place and then also this place. And so that's a really great way to just like open the door to talk about the program or whatever you want from it and then how that applies to whatever position you're talking about. So that's more of a practical way that is useful, but that's a way that I found it to be super helpful in like kind of making yourself stand out from other candidates who may have had a similar field of study. I will say that although I am not like directly like studying or like working with or like in Europe at the moment, I think all the skills gained in the program have been extremely helpful. I think just the fact that you can say that not only did you do a typical, you know, sometimes people see study abroad on your resume and they say, okay, you just went to Barcelona and like you hung out on the beach the whole time. But when you can say like, not only did I write a thesis there, but I also have this other degree to back that up and kind of give more substance to your study abroad experience, I think that was super effective in kind of also making yourself stand out as well.
So in thinking about why the transatlantic relationship is still important today and why you might want to study it, from my perspective in space, partnerships are really important. And in a lot of ways, our infrastructures are intertwined. And the way that you guide and choose those partnerships can have long-term effects for a lot of people. And for example, we were watching very intently, very recently, a astronaut came back from the ISS. And this was, of course, in the midst of our tension with Russia. And Russia is the only one who launches human spacecraft to and from the ISS, both to fuel them and resupply them, but also to move people. And so there were a lot of questions of how that might look for American astronaut to come back from the ISS on a Russian spaceship, and so on a Russian rocket. And so now there are questions about, well, how do we keep the ISS going? Because the people who fund it are Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and NASA. And so how do you build those partnerships? Who do you want to be your partner in scientific exploration, in building business? Because you have to rely on them. And so I think that understanding those relationships and being in positions to try and work in policy or frame those relationships or deepen those relationships can be really important to individuals, the astronaut coming back from the ISS, to larger research goals, being able to continue to fund and support human spaceflight and research, and then larger political goals as well. There's a lot of countries who really want to get into human spaceflight because it's a signature that's like a signifier of who you are as a nation. And I'm talking just from space, but the same principle happens across a lot of other businesses. Your partners matter because you have to trust them and you spend money with them and you rely on them to bring your people back from space or not. So who do you want to be your partner, and how can we shape that in a way that looks into the future for American security?
That is a very vivid anecdote. Think about someone getting stranded there.
Yeah, it's
Kind of. Amber.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective as someone who influences, writes, pushes policy and legislation in DC, no policy can be written or passed without international consideration. And if it is, it's a crap piece of legislation and should not be put forward, whether it's based on competition or if it's based on allyship. No matter what way you look at a piece of federal policy or legislation, there's always some type of international angle that is important to consider. And so, of course, that has to deal with Europe as well as everywhere. I guess one thing that I'm working on right now is, you all might have heard about the chip shortage, microelectronics. It's why cars are so expensive. And the US is trying to work with Europe and say, can we get together and figure this out? Because China's kicking our butts at this. And we really need each other right now to kind of solve this problem, get prices to go back down, etc. And so there are things like that that will pop up that become major policy issues for maybe a few months or maybe have an impact for a few decades. And without considering, how are we working with other countries to pursue our goals, it's just not good policy. Another angle from my job that mostly works as a lobbying consulting firm, most of our clients are research universities, but also research organizations, many of which have international collaborators, or they are foreign nationals and have a green card to work or study here. And a lot of what we do on a daily basis is figure out, what federal policy impacts them and how we can make sure that they're making the most of their current job or role at a university, and make sure they're following all the guidelines, but also making sure they could receive federal funding to help impact their research. And so I guess to tie it all together, without considering Europe, it's just, again, not good policy. And having that awareness and having not just an awareness for transatlantic policy, but how all these different ideas have different implications around the world is incredibly important, not just from where I work, but I imagine for most people's jobs.
Thank you for those perspectives. So my next question is a little later. What's your happiest moment from your days in the Euro major and in TAM? Let's start with you, Amber.
I have a lot. I still have really dear friends from TAM. We still have our entire WhatsApp group, and then we have a separate group of some of my TAM besties. And one, I guess, the best social memory is that one of my friends, Cal, who was in TAM at the time with me, he met someone during an internship in London, fell in love, and then ended up getting married. So we all had a TAM reunion a few years later when they celebrated in London. So that's my best social TAM memory, because it was just fun to see all of my classmates again, have such a joyous celebration, see what everyone was up to, and have London as the meeting place. I mean, how cool is that? My best memory specific to school, I mean, I think it had to be when Barcelona tried to secede, and I was there that day when everyone was wearing basically nothing but Catalan flags, and there was popping champagne. And I remember going to class 2 weeks later, and all we did was talk about why the secession was so important. And I don't know, coming from the US or just from a back, I didn't really understand. You know, we had the Civil War. I was just like, okay, yeah, people disagree. And they're like, listen to our history and listen to how deep rooted this is. And that was a really transformative experience for me as an expat going in, being like, well, I've studied Spain, I understand it. But to really be there and live it with people from not just coming over from TAM, but all over Europe that were also in my classes and hear their perspectives, I feel like it was a pivotal point for me to understand, yeah, I have these opinions, and as an American, I have a certain idea of what I've studied and what I think, but that was just blown out of the water by having such a transformative political experience during my classes abroad. So
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear about. Some other students have talked to me about that kind of learning outside of the classroom, and especially coming into contact with people from such different backgrounds and cultures, and that's so valuable to them moving forward, which, yeah, to live it is really. Erin, do you have a favorite memory?
I do. So I also have had some really wonderful friends that I've made and kept through TAM. And one of the coolest experiences was in Bremen. German Christmas markets are wonderful, but Bremen has a really special flavor to theirs because they have a long history as like a medieval port city. So they have this Christmas festival that's like half Renaissance fair, half pirates, all Christmas.
Oh,
Half pirates, and it is wild, and I could not recommend it more. I have never been anywhere like that. Pirate Christmas, you didn't know you need it. In like a personal growth and learning about the world around me kind of way, I was able to do a trip to Istanbul, and one of the most interesting experiences while I was there was you always knew if you met someone Kurdish, because as soon as you introduce yourself, whether it was in a little restaurant or in a taxi, like, oh, where are you from? America. Do you know about the Kurds? I'm a Kurd. And being able to sort of see that in Istanbul. And similar to Amber, I thought I understood, but I didn't understand until I was there. Was really incredible.
I have a lot that came to mind. I think one of the best ones is, I guess, the theme of friendships. There were two other TAM students that I lived with in Barcelona, and we had this incredible apartment that one of them found. I think it had 6 balconies in it. It looked scary from the outside, but then once you got inside, you were like, okay, this is really cool. And it was just like a really fun neighborhood, but also one of the largest drug busts in Spanish history happened like in our neighborhood, like in every building except for ours, which I guess was the right choice. I was just coming back from a walk and I saw helicopters and every street was blocked off. So that was a story that I did not share with my mom. But nonetheless, it was still really interesting. Another one was we all went to Morocco together for like about a week, which was really cool because none of us had really ventured into that part of the world. Unfortunately, we all got sick like in the middle of it, and I got the most sick, and so I got to enjoy it the least. But it was still just really cool to have a group that you could say, let's go here, let's go to this place, and let's just like take advantage of the time that we have in travel. And then also just all the students that were in our like the master's program in Barcelona too, that I still keep up with. Also, people from all over the world, not just Europe, international as well. And so that was a really cool experience that I wasn't expecting, considering the last study abroad experience I did in France. I went pretty much by myself, and it was a little bit tougher to make friends. But coming into this program where like you had a cohort and everyone kind of stuck together and like saw themselves through the entire program, I think was really valuable and the experience was interesting.
Thank you. I just have one more question, and then I'm gonna let other people have a turn. What you've talked a little bit, Jonathan, about being able to tell the TAM story and having that be compelling when you're looking for jobs. You've all had great internship and job success. So you've also talked about the alumni network. What other things can you talk about that you would give, advice to other people who want to be in your shoes eventually? What did you do right? What went right?
I talk to everyone. Okay. It's also in my personality, but in some way, and I think there's a big credit to having the network, but also, hearing about job opportunities and posting them on certain pages. I think for me, it was talking to everyone, not just with the angle of, hey, I'm looking for an internship or a job, but to learn what jobs are out there. And so things like the TAM trip to DC, where you go to the State Department, but you also go to a think tank, just talk to everyone you know, whether it's TAM or if you do TAM, you go abroad and talk to all the other students that aren't from America and learn their background. I think that allows you such a greater perspective that then makes you a little more interesting of a candidate when you are applying to jobs or internships. And kind of like Jonathan said, people will say, well, I see this on your resume, and not only do you have skills to back it up, but you also have anecdotes and real life experiences and connections. I think that make you more of a real person and not just a resume.
I would say if you're curious, ask or try it. There are some internships that I've done that while I did not enjoy them at the time, the most valuable thing I learned was that I didn't want to do that. I had an internship at a law office. So if you're curious, if you think you might want to do it, go try. Ask someone about it. People love talking about themselves. You don't have to say something interesting for it to be a valuable conversation to you. Someone else might say something interesting. So don't be afraid to ask. Even if you're not sure that you'll like it, you might like it, go try it. See if you like it. Because if you don't, that's important to know too. As much as the fantastic internships, bad experiences are sometimes the most important. And I certainly don't regret taking that internship, and I don't regret applying. Also, when it's time to start looking for jobs, I think the same kind of attitude. If you're interested at all, apply. You don't have to stay there. No one's making you stay there. See if you like it. And if you don't like it, find something else. No one's locking you in for a full career, but maybe you can learn something there. Or learn that you hate it, and then don't go back. And that's valuable too.
That's exactly what I was going to say, that learning what you don't like is just as important. I also think another important part is to not compare yourself to others, not only like in TAM, but just like in general, because there will obviously be the few people like right after you graduate that have like what you think would be like typical, cool like State Department or like any of these other kind of like what you think of. Oh, you did European studies, you are going to do this, obviously. But obviously, as we've all said, that everyone has different experiences and everyone's paths are really different. And so I think just like taking the time to not compare yourself to like, oh, this person seems a little more ahead, or they seem like they have their stuff together, which that may or may not be true. But I also think just taking the time to network as much as possible too. Like when I was an intern, that's something I really took advantage of. And what I've learned recently is that shouldn't stop just because you have a job. And also, you don't have to like network with people with the end goal of getting a job. You can just simply like hear other people's experiences experiences, and I think that's also really valuable. Just to hear about something and then walk away and say, I don't ever want to do it. Their job sounds stressful, even if they really like it. And so those parts are just as important, and that you don't always have to like think of networking as this like transactional thing, or like I meet with you for coffee and then you give me a job in 2 years. Sometimes it works like that, but like most of the time it's really just interesting to hear everyone's different paths, and like especially with TAM, all of the like really different things that everyone's done.
Well, do you have questions for each other or for the audience at all? No pressure. Give you the first turn.
What are you guys doing? Who are you?
No. They're like, dang it.
Cool.
So I'm in a business school studying here. I'm just here to study them.
I'm Victoria. I'm the business manager for the Center for European Studies. We corresponded via email.
I'm Tim. I'm a senior undergraduate here at student. I will be studying him.
Nice. Hey Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm a TAM student. I was abroad during the year, so right before the pandemic. I'm a senior in NC State, large TAM, TAM, guided for TAM.
Yay,
Should
Tam.
be, yeah. We should have it like on our foreheads.
Sorry, I only know your accent. I don't know what you.
Oh yeah, sorry,
So
my name
nice
is
to
Sam.
meet
I guess
you.
I should have mentioned that part too.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm first grad student next year. I'm Inga. I'm also a first year town student. I'm in Sweden. I'm engineering.
Awesome.
And I'm Brett, we met earlier. I'm heading to Berlin, and I'm hopefully writing my thesis on sports and diversity, which was way longer than it actually is, but yeah.
Do you all have questions for the panel?
Hi. Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering, like, how did you happen to land a job at Alums? Or like, what made you like attracted to it? Like, because you said you like tried out so many different internships, what was it like? Oh, I'm gonna take it.
It was completely unexpected. So I applied to a lot of government agencies, and the Department of Defense offer is the one that I picked. And in part of that process, they don't necessarily tell you exactly where you're going to go. And so my boss now called me and was like, hey, I see you don't have Colorado on your list of places you want to go. Would you go anyways? And I was like, yeah, I'd love a job. And so I went. And it's been super, and in that way, I did not expect it at all. I knew I was going to do Department of Defense stuff. That's super broad. That's all kinds of things. And then I ended up at Space Command. I thought I was going to Northcom the whole time, and then I was like, oh, space, cool. But it worked out really, really well, and I guess I'll take a minute on my Space Command soapbox in that space really does touches every single thing we do. If you like, we all think of GPS, but it's also in being able to use your debit card. It's being able to a lot of cars. It's built in, and the United States probably should have built a Space Command 20 years ago. And so it's a hugely growing field, not only in space, human space flight, and trying to go to Mars and trying to go to the moon and all those things, but also in our basic infrastructure, space is woven into that. And it's something that we haven't taken care of probably the way we should have in being able to protect our infrastructure. And so being able to work on that in a field that is rapidly growing, in a field that is built on partnerships and is foundational to the United States and Europe, and being able to function, their infrastructure being able to function is super cool. And so long story short, I fell into it, but it's been fantastic. And in that way, I definitely would continue to encourage people of, if you're curious at all, go try it. If you had told Aaron in undergraduate or in grad school that I'd be working on orbital mechanics, I would have been like, you're talking about someone else. I'd skip math. That's how it is.
So, Aaron, you talked a little bit about your bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more on that? Or the other thing you talked about in saying like advice or things for like approaching not just the school bureaucracy, which is really different, but also just like teachers, do they have a different attitude towards work and towards, I know in the Netherlands they were a lot less willing to help people in prison, or stuff like that you would expect from like an American professor.
Yeah, I definitely found that to be true. German bureaucracy is challenging, like being able to get the green cards and, well, not green cards, but the paperwork I needed to be there. The office, for example, was open on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that was the only time it was open. And if you were not in line at 5:30, you were not getting seen that day. Or coming back into do my thesis here during the pandemic, when I finished the thesis, I had to send them in the mail during the pandemic 4 hard copies of my thesis and a thumb drive with my thesis on it. So it's challenging. I would say that you really need to advocate for yourself. Make someone tell you no, and probably make them tell you no twice. And then ask someone else and make them tell you no. You have to be your own advocate. I think you should talk about why you don't have your diploma.
Yeah. So the Spanish diploma, apparently it takes so long to get it because supposedly the king does sign it. And so that's a year process, and then you're supposed to go make an appointment to pick it up. Obviously that costs money and is harder for people that do not live in Barcelona. So you would think the alternative option is to let us just, mail it to you with insurance or something. You must have, no, that is not the case. You must have power of attorney if someone else is going to pick it up for you, which I feel like that's difficult to do in the US. So like trying to do it in Spain is much more difficult. And so mine is probably just sitting somewhere in a cabinet until I'm ready to go to Barcelona again. But the visa process also came to mind when Sarah asked about like memorable experiences, just because the rules are on the website, but those are not the real rules.
Spain cares that they don't care, but they
we
care.
found the
Germany
real
just doesn't have
rules
websites.
from this woman's blog online, and like the actual like how-tos of how to do it, and like all the forms and stuff. Like Aaron was saying, you really do just have to advocate or just like find a way to like supersede the system in a way, to make it work for you, and say like, okay, but this rule says this, but I'm just going to do this anyways and see what happens. But that's also part of the experience that like is something that you can't get in a classroom, and it's something that you can't, learn in like a webinar or something. And that's something that's useful in like later in life when, no one tells you about like how to set up a retirement account, or like how much you should get paid your first job, how to negotiate your salary, how to negotiate like a job offer to like include other things. And so it just sets you up to like just be open to different things that will be more helpful to you.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just kept receipts on everything, a master schedule. Organization is key, but it doesn't always pay off, especially depending on the country. But that's when I think, especially leaning on this, I'm sure Sarah got so many frantic emails where like the UPS or like Pompeu Fabra hasn't answered any of this, and she's like, it's okay, I'll email someone, I'll take care of it. Like also having that as a backstop was helpful to be like, this has happened to other students and they all survived, like not the end of the world, which I need to be told every now and again. So.
I did. So I am currently working for the center. I'm very familiar with your work on Title VI.
Sorry.
No, it was really helpful. Thank you.
Don't be sorry.
But so for all of you, I guess, kind of like that kind of first like job or internship kind of out of either being here or whatever. I wonder how did you feel at all like kind of like stuck like in all academia, or like how did you kind of make that leap or connection from what you did to where you're going or where you're going?
Everyone wants money. And so grants, being able to write a grant, being able to navigate a grant system, to know the words about how grants are managed, everyone wants money. Whether that's arts or academics, Department of Defense, Department of State. It's a great stepping stone.
And even with fundraising too, like I've learned more than I thought about like business process and like the finance side of things, because you can have all these wonderful ideas for things, but they just end up ideas if you don't have any funding. And so I feel like being on the more like practical side of like how are we gonna actually like, yes, this is a really cool project and like this is so cool and this is gonna like have this impact or like change this policy, but like if we can't find the funding for it, like you're just gonna have to keep trying or figure out another option. And I think grants is something that like it's applicable, like Erin was saying, to like any field. And I was more interested in like the nonprofit sector, which has its pros and its cons, but grants are a super important part of all of that, and like that's how everyone gets paid. That's how things like this event happen. It's really just like crucial. It's kind of like the part that you don't see in the background, but that is like super crucial to everything. And once you learn that, and like if you find it interesting, you can really kind of do a lot. Obviously, you don't go to school to like study grants, but it's a great skill to have.
Once again, they made my answer easy because my whole job is to increase funding for federal grants. So money, unfortunately, makes the world go around, and understanding that landscape, that's a skill that is super valuable in any sector you look in.
And going from managing grants to like managing contracts is not that big of a step. So that's another way to angle that.
But just a follow-up question, like how is the transition between like school and then having the first job, like what was like kind of scary at the beginning, and what were the biggest challenges to start working?
I think to Jonathan's point about money and negotiating, I didn't really know what a starting salary was for someone that had a graduate degree, but I hadn't had work experience before. I'm also moving to DC with a high cost of living. And so trying to navigate all of that was probably the most stressful. I also was doing it while writing my thesis. So Bob Jenkins was not happy with me when he was like, you need to focus on your thesis. And I'm like, but I'm trying to find a place to live and trying to find a full-time job and working on my internship and like at a clothes store to make ends meet. So that was probably the most stressful period because it was just kind of compressed where I needed to get all my school stuff done, but I was trying to launch into the next part of my life and try to not let anything drop. Thankfully, I feel like I hate it when people say it all works out, but I feel like if you're just hustling and you have a plan, you can make it happen.
The best thing is I can't work from home. And so when I leave work, I am done working unless you're going to call me in. And that is awesome. And I highly recommend that. because school can bleed into everything you're doing. There's always something you could be doing for school. And that is the best part of my job. And I think that even if you don't have hard stops in your job like that, sometimes enforcing them yourself and having boundaries can be a transition, but it's very important to be able to say, no, I'm done working now. Unless you're going to call me in, I'm done. The hardest thing, depending on where you go, can be a huge culture shift. And knowing if that's important to you or what the culture you would want is important. And that can be a challenge. And so I think that's something to be prepared for. Because the culture, how it feels from the outside or how it feels in an interview is not always the same as how it's going to feel when you're there. And sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's difficult. So I would say that was the challenge. That with the work-life balance, it's an important thing to enforce for yourself.
I would say the best part is not having to do homework after like 5 p.m. I think the balance is really helpful. I found challenging for me recently was going from a really small organization to a really big one with a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of like process. Whereas like my first job, I would draft a grant and then send it to my boss. She would make edits and then I would just like submit it on the portal. But like Brookings has a whole institutional review of every proposal, every agreement. It goes through like 5 or 6 different people. It goes through like the general counsel. It goes through all these processes of things that you don't even think about because it's way like your pay grade. But just like going from a really small place where you wear a lot of hats to a bigger place where you're kind of more like, this is your role, you can only do this. Like, don't try and like veer too much from that. So I'm still trying to figure out if I like a smaller organization or a larger one. Whereas like Brookings is like I think almost 500 people total. And so that also just like the flexibility there. And it's easy to move around and do different things where you don't have that with a small organization. I guess it's just similar to like if you want to go to small or large university. There are pros and cons, but
I think that's a really good point. When I was at Bertelsmann, which was a really great experience, there was only 7 people in the office. And I'm a very social person and like I like to be chatty, and there's only so much you can do with 7 people day in, day out. And so now my firm has 40 to 50 people, which I'm able to find a social circle. We have like bigger events and things like that. And so like not just the job, but keeping that aspect in mind of like, what do you want your day to day to be? Because my then boss at Bertelsmann, he was like, I love closing my door. I love doing my work, opening the door when I leave, and that's it. He's like, I don't need anything else. And I was like, I don't think I could do that. So that's a really good point.
This is, I guess, a question for all 3 of you, but in particular for the 2 that are in DC. Do you ever find yourself butting heads with people that have gone to one of the DC schools, Georgetown or George Washington, or any of those? And also for DoD, do you often find yourself running into these people and having any issues with like finding a job or internships, or have you had an experience in that in the past, or is it kind of a non-starter?
I would say a lot of those people, sometimes that's all they have to bring to the table.
Yeah.
And that's what they lead with, and then they don't give you any other experience or like any other. All they say is like, I went to Georgetown, and they think that that is going to get them an internship. Because I've helped select our interns for the past few rounds, and like I've had a few where I talked to, and like all they've said is like, I go to Yale, I go to Dartmouth. Like, okay, you should give me something a little more interesting. I think coming from a school like UNC, which is still well regarded, but then you also have this like really interesting twist on your experience at UNC. I think is going to benefit you, and I think people are looking more to like hire and recruit people from like state schools, and I think since a lot of places are having more of a focus on like DEI, I think that is also contributing to that.
Yeah. I think that competition will always be there, but I mean, not to cast too much judgment, but to what Jonathan said, a lot of people that rely on just their resume without any relevant experience, you fall flat in an interview unless some places that is what they're looking for. They are looking to hire a resume and they're looking to say, okay, we have this person, they went to, this is who their parents are, and they went to this school, so we're going to hire them. And that exists and it runs very deep in DC. There's also this whole other world where I'm a federal lobbyist now and I'd never worked remotely close to the Hill, but they saw my resume and I'd actually applied for an internship and they called me and they're like, so you have a master's degree, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, don't waste your time with this internship. Like, come interview for us and be a research assistant. And most of the call was focused on like studying in Spain. It wasn't about the job because they were just like, we don't get this every day. And then once I got to the firm, I understood so many people had lived abroad or like they had worked at embassies. And so it all made sense once I got there. But I was like, why aren't you talking to me about like consulting and things like that? But they were just like intrigued by my resume. And so I do think like it really does stand out. And again, always places that don't care as much about that. Some places really do.
I'll say my experience is kind of different. The majority of people I work with have active duty experience, are either active duty or retired. I guess the other college that's well represented is probably the Bush School. There's a lot of those folks floating around. But I think that in the same way, the diversity of experience that that UNC and TAM brings is valuable. It's not just a name, but it's a different experience and a different set of learning and a different set of challenges that you face moving back and forth with TAM and dealing with different systems. And I think the depth of experience here is really valuable. Yeah, although I'm mostly in the minority because I don't have active duty experience.
I would also say really quickly that having work experience of any type, I think, is really helpful instead of just like, I took this course or I did this. Like, if you can just show that like you have some work experience, I think that is something that people are looking at too. That is really helpful, even if something as simple as like I worked in like the accessibility office as like the front desk person. It doesn't matter what it is. It's like just something so that when you get to working in an office for the first time, you're not like completely overwhelmed.
And even, I mean, my firm hired another TAM graduate, Andrew, who was, I guess, a year after me. And his relevant experience was like he had interned at the embassy and done all the TAM things, but then he also worked at a catering company. They're like, why are you doing that? And he's like, well, I have to make money and food. He's like, I like food and it's a fun atmosphere and I like to meet people at parties. And I remember people, because I wasn't interviewing him, they came back to me and they were like, we talked to him about his catering and it was really interesting how he just like liked to do it because he liked the social aspect and it was just different from the schoolwork he did all day. So even minor things like that, like they matter.
I think that's really important. When I was at Department of State, I asked the people who picked the interns, why did you pick me? And they said, well, I mean, you had the degree that, everyone else has, political science, whatever. But I worked for a while at a small business that made mead in Durham just because I thought it was cool. I just liked doing it. And I put that on my resume. They're like, that seemed pretty neat. And you seem like a cool person to work with because that seems like an interesting experience. So just going back to, if you're curious about it, you should do it. Because they're also picking who do I want to work with.
Yeah.
And if you're a more well-rounded person, that's more interesting. And before I was at DoD during the pandemic, I was a barista. And I enjoyed it. And I asked my boss too now, so why'd you pick me? And he said, well, on your resume, you made it sound like every job you had was important. So those other experiences that you do just because you like them or just because you want to try it or it's interesting is still really important.
Yeah. Sort of a different topic away from that. What were your thesis topics? What was
Okay, I'll go first. So my thesis topic was on migration law in Austria and how right-wing organizations, right-wing parties in Austria were able to influence how migration and social policy laws were made in Austria. And I think the most important thing for me was that the internship that I was doing while I was in Bremen was really closely linked to that topic. And so the work that I was already doing could feed into my thesis. And then I had a super supportive thesis advisor, Bob Jenkins. He's awesome, especially because my German thesis advisor was like, no, we need to work so much more on this because Germans take their time with school, and I needed to be done. And they were fully, totally happy, the Germans, for me to do another semester and continue to work on my thesis. And Bob Jenkins stood up for me, and he was like, absolutely not. It's good enough. We're done. And so having a thesis advisor, on the one hand, one of them that was really invested in the topic and could support me from that side, but also having an advisor that was looking out for me as a person was really important for me.
My thesis was on the securitization of foreign aid, which is just a fancy way to say it was a comparative study. Does the EU, or all the members of the EU use, I guess I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. They use foreign aid as a cover for national security. And at the end of the day, yes, although Europe does not have the same thing as an army, I didn't even touch NATO. It was looking at all the other ways that Europe or the EU can strong arm other countries through foreign aid. So it was really interesting because I thought I was going to find, like, of course the US uses foreign aid so much more for security reasons. Like, we have a military industrial complex. And then when I looked into it and all the differences, the US kind of has this whole military complex and the EU is so segregated that when I aggregated it and put it all together, I was like, oh, it's not too far off from what we do. So it was interesting, a little disheartening, but it shows you kind of what makes the world go around, and some countries aren't that different after all from each other.
I did mine on a comparison between the AFD in Germany and the FN in France and what led to each of their respective successes. Something that was helpful for me was having kind of like an on-the-ground person in Barcelona, like thesis advisor, and then also having a professor here who was kind of just giving a more like high-level, this is moving in the right direction. And then I had someone in Barcelona who was like, move this paragraph here. So I think that was a really unique way to go about it. I also think, as I alluded to, just like the way that we did it in a kind of like methodical process of like starting with what is a research question in general. And then at the end, we each got to like defend it in front of these two professors, which was more just like giving a presentation, and they asked you like 2 questions and you got a check mark. But that part was really, I think, helpful to just like condense what you had written into just like a short 10-minute presentation. And so that kind of just like brought it more to life, instead of like, obviously you're not going to read every one of your classmates' papers, but it was really cool to hear their presentations and like what their findings were, and like if there were any findings at all. Some people didn't find it.
Well, if you're on Zoom and you have questions, please put them in the chat. Do you have other questions? Hypothetically, what would someone in each of your positions go to next?
I think for like fundraising specifically, there are different ways you can take that. So you can do like, I think what most people typically think of fundraising in terms of like asking rich people for money, which is something you can do. You can focus more on like foundations or like the corporate side and like getting money from corporations. You can focus on like the grants database and like get really into that. But I think the next step for me is to do some kind of like a development manager position where I'm not having conversations conversations with funders, but I'm like helping to move things along across programs and not just like my specific area. And then also, if I was like really interested in continuing fundraising, you can get like a certified fundraising executive like certificate. You can like take a class and take an exam, and that just like lends more credibility to what you're doing, continuing fundraising. But I think overall, it's a really good way to get a broad set of skills, and then apply that to it.
Well, one of the neat things about the federal government is once you're in, it's really easy to move around to different agencies within your own agency. So I'm going to stick with space for a little while, and we'll see where it goes. Till I find something else I think is interesting, and then I guess I'll apply to that.
I absolutely love my job. It's been 4 years, so, but never say never. Who knows what'll fall in my lap. But once you kind of have a broad expertise of federal policy, so understanding how an administration works, how Congress works, but also being able to draft legislation and influence legislation, you become pretty useful to a lot of different players. So I think the next step for me would be working in a congressional office on the Hill, perhaps going to a federal agency and working more in the congressional office there, or going pivoting to private sector and going into think tanks, foundation, and kind of working that policy angle and lobbying through them. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you don't have more questions, we could put you to dinner. Good.
Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, people love talking about themselves, like Aaron said, like they do.